Today on Zoo Clues, we'll investigate animal invaders. We'll see just how invasive they can be and why it's almost always the humans that did it. We'll discover one of Florida's biggest problems and uncover the secret life of a particular toad. All this and much more coming up now on Zoo Clues. The adventure starts here and leads us into the wild and everywhere else animals live. We'll ask questions and discover the answers. Let the investigation begin. This is Zoo Clues. Just what is an animal invader? That's our way of describing an invasive species. So what's an invasive species? That's a species that shows up and ruins everyone's party. Yep, they show up, invite all of their friends, and then eat all the food. Once they eat all the good stuff, there isn't much left for everyone else. It's not just animals that can be invaders either. Plants, fungi, and bacteria can too. Now let's take a look at some animal invaders up close. Here's your first question. Which of these animals causes millions of dollars of damage to Australia each year? Is it outback bears, European rabbits, or African fruit bats? Here's your clue. There are no bears in Australia, even in the outback, unless you count crocodiles, which you shouldn't because they're crocodiles. The answer is European rabbits. Rabbits were introduced to Australia in the mid-1800s. So what makes them an invasive species? Well, they pretty much took over the place. They eat constantly, and since the winters are mild, they reproduce, like rabbits, all year long. In just 10 years, the population went from 24 to countless millions. They destroy crops and can devastate the local ecology because the plants they eat hold the soil in place. Since the rabbits didn't have much competition for food and had few natural predators, they were nearly unstoppable. Here's a question. Which method proved most effective in controlling rabbit populations? Was it destroying dens, hunting parties, or biological attack? Here's your clue. Hunting 600 million rabbits is pretty much impossible. The answer is biological attack. In the mid-1900s, a bunch of scientists got together and did some testing. They researched a virus that was fatal to rabbits. Convinced by their results, they released the virus into the rabbit population and sat back to watch. It ended up killing nearly 500 million rabbits, or nearly 85% of the population. But even that didn't stop them. They developed some immunity and the population bounced back, but not as bad as before. As you can see, getting rid of an invasive species can be incredibly difficult, even with science on your side. Let's take a look at another animal invader with our next question. True or false? Nightcrawler earthworms are considered an invasive species. Here's your clue. Earthworms love to eat leaf litter, the thick layer of leaves on the forest floor. The answer is true. Earthworms are considered an invasive species in the hardwood forest of the U.S. Great Lakes area. That kind of seems to go against the idea that earthworms are great for your garden. But the truth is, that layer of leaf litter that they love to eat, well, that's where all the tree seedlings start to grow. But when the earthworm shows up, all they do is eat that litter. In the process of doing that, they also change the soil composition, which makes that litter layer decompose faster. Given enough years, they can strip an area and make it almost impossible for new trees to grow and take root. That makes us wonder, how did the forest get so big in the first place? Since it seems like earthworms are pretty much everywhere. Let's find out. How did the invasive earthworms get into the forests in the first place? Is it people fishing or birds dropping them? Here's your clue. Birds don't usually drop their food, though that's sort of plausible. Kinda. The answer is people fishing. Imagine that you go fishing one day at a pond in the forest. Now imagine that nothing is biting that day and you have to go home empty-handed. And instead of letting the night crawlers you were using for bait die in your tackle box, you decide to release them back into the wild. So you dump them in the forest and go home thinking about how awesome you are because you spared those worms' lives. But the problem is, all of the native earthworms died out and the forest spent years and years growing without them. And then you come along with your bad fishing luck and change all of that. Coming up next, we'll discover more of the world's worst animal invaders. But first, let's see if you can guess the name of this mystery animal. The answer coming up next on Zoo Clues. Time to reveal our mystery animal. Do you think you know what it is? That's a silver carp. It's a species of Asian carp that can totally devastate a local ecosystem. But it doesn't do it in the same way that other carp do. It's got something in common with certain whale species. That's because it doesn't eat food like other carp. Instead, it filters the water for tiny organisms called phytoplankton. In fact, the silver carp doesn't even have a stomach. It just filters the water constantly. So what makes them invasive? Their appetite. You see, their filter system is so complex that they leave behind almost nothing when feeding. Since phytoplankton is at the bottom of the food chain, you can see how these fish could devastate a lake or river ecosystem. Not to mention that its eyes are almost below its mouth, which is creepy and makes it look like it's swimming upside down. Speaking of creepy, there's another invasive fish species that's totally gonna blow your mind. Here's a question. What does the snakehead fish do when its water source dries up? Is it finds a new one, lays eggs, or hibernates? Here's your clue. Fish don't hibernate. Instead, they go into a state of dormancy when the water gets cold. But when their water source dries up, snakehead fish take to the land and find a new one. Incredibly, their gills have the ability to breathe air, which means they can wiggle and flop on land in search of a new home. That is, provided that the area they're traveling is wet. They're fish, not miracle workers. And they're also a top-level predator, which means that wherever they end up, they're at the top of the food chain. If they end up in a lake or river in North America, they do what most invasive species do. They start to eat. And since they don't have to worry about being eaten, they can pretty much do whatever they want, which is eating, constantly. Oh, and lay over 75,000 eggs each year. Each! Now, let's jump out of the water and flop into the woods for our next question. True or false? Wild boars sometimes catch and eat deer fawns. Here's your clue. Wild boars are omnivores. You remember what an omnivore is, right? Right? The answer is true. Omnivores eat just about anything, and the wild boar is a firm believer in that deal. That's because it has to be. You see, it uses over 4,000 calories per day just to exist. That's double what an average human needs. And since they have almost no natural predators in most ecosystems, they just root around all day eating almost anything they come across. That includes leaves and tree bark. And if they're in an environment where the winter is easy, they can grow to be pretty huge. We're talking 300 pounds huge. One of the things humans can do to control the population of invasive species is to create a hunting season for them. Making it legal to hunt certain animals allows humans to cull the population and keep native species from being muscled out. Which brings us to the Burmese python, which are huge snakes native to Southern Asia. So, how did they make it to Florida to become an invasive species? Is it they swam there? Hurricane damage? Dolphins carried them? Or floating eggs? Here's your clue. Even though Burmese pythons can swim, traversing half the planet by ocean would be impossible for them. And it would be incredibly cool if dolphins did it, but they didn't. The answer is hurricane damage. You see, Burmese pythons are prized exotic pets because they're relatively calm in captivity. Plus, they're non-venomous. But the population of pythons really exploded when a hurricane hit a pet python breeding facility in the early 90s. The escaped pythons kicked off a population explosion in Florida because the swamplands are the perfect habitat. And aside from alligators and humans, they have no natural predators in the area. So in order to control the population, humans created a hunting season for them. It works okay, but not as good as hoped because of the extreme remoteness of where they live. Now, let's take a look at an invasive species that costs humans billions of dollars. The zebra mussel. Here's a question. What do the zebra mussel, the silver carp, and the blue whale have in common? Is it they're filter feeders, they're powerful swimmers, or they have amazing eyesight? Here's your clue. Mussels are kind of the exact opposite of powerful swimmers. The answer is they're filter feeders. They're one of the most invasive animals in North America. Zebra mussels anchor themselves to any hard surface using small, thread-like structures. Once attached, they simply kick back and filter the water for nutrients by pumping it in and out of their shell. Since they are from the Black and Caspian Seas, they have few predators in North America that can keep up with how fast they eat and reproduce. They foul up just about anything that humans put into the water. Boats, dams, water pipes, bridges, other mussels. Anything can serve as a perch for these guys. People sometimes get sick eating zebra mussels because they're such efficient filter feeders. They tend to collect lots of toxic chemicals in their bodies as they filter the water around them. So when people or animals eat them, they're eating concentrated toxic chemicals, which causes problems, and in rare cases, superpowers. But still, might want to avoid those if they're on the menu. Coming up next, we'll meet a crab that wears mittens and an ant that causes fire. But first, let's see if you can guess the name of this mystery animal. The answer coming up next on Zoo Clues. Time to reveal our mystery animal. Do you think you know what it is? That's an Asian tiger mosquito. Quite possibly the single most hated animal on the planet. It's natively from the islands of Southeast Asia, but it's pretty much invading the world at this point. So how does it get around? Oddly enough, tires. Old tires are shipped all over the world for tons of different purposes. Unfortunately, they're also shipped with water sloshing around on the inside. That's what happened to Italy, courtesy of the United States. Tiger mosquitoes invaded the southern United States and multiplied. Some of them reproduced in a pile of used tires in the state of Georgia in the early 90s. Then, those tires were shipped to Italy for trade. When they arrived, the mosquitoes hatched and threw a huge party. A huge party that everyone in Italy was required to attend, whether they like it or not. Sorry, Italy. Speaking of invasive exports, this is the Chinese mitten crab, named for its large, fuzzy claws. Let's investigate with a question. What is the fuzz on the mitten crab's claws called? Is it exohair, setae, or whiskers? Here's your clue. The crab has a hard exoskeleton, and without that fuzz, it wouldn't be able to feel when it got touched. The answer is setae. They're super sensitive little structures that are connected to the crab's nervous system. Sort of similar to how a cat uses its whiskers to feel around. So what makes these mitten-wearing crustaceans an invasive species? They love to burrow. Their burrowing can cause embankments to erode quicker and can cause clogging and damage to piping. Plus, they can travel large distances inland, sometimes using swimming pools and ponds as their new home. Too bad the mitten crab can't fly, but this next animal can. It's called the Japanese beetle, and it's become the scourge of gardeners in the United States. What do these little beetles do to plants that's so bad? Is it drink too much sap, skeletonize foliage, or burrow into the roots? Here's your clue. Japanese beetles spend most of their time near the leaves of the plant. The answer is skeletonize foliage. Sounds kind of scary, and it definitely is if you're a plant. The Japanese beetle eats all the parts of the leaf except the veins. So when they're done, the leaf looks like a veiny skeleton of its former self. And the Japanese beetle looks like a fuller version of its former self. In Japan, these beetles are kept in check by lots of different species. But in the US, it's a different story. The US wasn't prepared, and the Japanese beetle's power to destroy plants works much faster than the time it takes for predators to develop. Invasive species are an incredible burden to ecosystems and economic systems. One of the worst of the bunch is called the gypsy moth. Here's a question. What is defoliation? Is it removing the bark from a tree, removing the leaves from a tree, or removing the sap from a tree? Here's your clue. Healthy trees can usually recover from defoliation. The answer is removing the leaves from a tree. The gypsy moth loves leaves, so much that they can completely defoliate entire forests. If trees have already been weakened by other defoliations, then they might actually die. Their population is usually kept in check by predators externally and virus outbreaks internally. But when their population increases, humans take action. One of those includes spraying areas with pesticides specifically designed to kill gypsy moths. The other includes a healthy population of small rodents. If humans catch an outbreak fast enough, it can usually be slowed or stopped. Even still, they end up costing the country lots of treasure each year, but saving the trees is definitely worth the trouble. So when it comes to costing humans money, time, and a lot of pain, we can add this next animal to the list. It's the red fire ant, and it's the topic of our next question. What do fire ants do if their nest floods? Is it cling together to form a floating ant ball, or retreat to a waterproof chamber in their nest? Here's your clue. Ants need air to breathe. Lots of ants in a small enclosed space need lots of air. The answer is cling together to form a floating ant ball. They enclose the queen in the middle for protection. Then the ant ball floats along with the floodwater. When it hits a tree or other hard surface, the ants all scatter and start climbing up. Then they simply hang out until the danger passes. Fire ants can destroy crops and cause extremely painful bites in humans, which feel like fire. Some people have severe allergic reactions to the fire ant's venom and have to be hospitalized. Speaking of huge ecological disasters, how can we not mention the cane toad? It's another invasive species that invaded Australia. Remember the rabbits? Kinda like that, except less cute. Here's your question. What do cane toads secrete from glands in their skin? Is it poison, musk, tears, or sweat? Here's your clue. Cane toad tadpoles are toxic to many of the predators that try to eat them. The answer is poison. When threatened, the glands secrete a poison that can actually kill or incapacitate most predators. That includes humans, so don't go eating one. They have an incredible appetite and almost no natural predators in Australia. In fact, since most of the animals in Australia are deadly, these things fit right in. Don't go away, Zoo Clues will be right back. So, we've seen truly devastating species with some amazing adaptations and the luck of having no natural predators. It's incredible how much damage one species can do to an entire ecosystem. Let's continue to explore. Now it's time for Animal Oddities, where we bring you the most unique, strange, and amazing animals from all around the world. Let's take another look at our disastrous friend, the cane toad. One of the reasons it's an invasive species is that it can eat almost anything. It's incredibly unique in the amphibian community. They can eat insects, other amphibians, birds, dead stuff, plants, and they're notorious thieves. What do they steal? Dog food. They love to eat dog food out of bowls people leave outside for their pets. One of the things cane toads can do better than other frogs is detect odor. Since they have great eyes and great noses, they can find food almost anywhere. Since Australian animals are often killed off when trying to eat the toad, scientists are working on a plan. They want to train animals to avoid cane toads before the cane toads kill the population. So how do you train animals to avoid cane toads? You use sausage. Scientists mixed up a sausage with some cane toad meat and other foul-tasting stuff. They drop them all over, then let the animals learn for themselves. The cool part is, it actually works. Native species are learning to avoid the cane toad without the penalty of death. Here's one more animal oddity. Let's take a closer look at the fire ants. In an ant colony, some of the fire ants are part of the cleanup crew. They take waste and old food to a place away from the colony and discard it. They also dispose the corpses of their fallen comrades like that too. That affects the overall health of the colony because it prevents contamination. So how does an ant whose job it is to pick up ant bodies know that it's picking up a dead ant? Like any animal, ants start to decompose soon after they die. And it's that process that releases a chemical signal into the air. That signal alerts the ant cleanup crew to do its job. And if a living ant gets any of that chemical on it, yep, they carry that ant away too. Well, we're out of time again. But we'll be back next week with more brain-busting animal questions and their amazing answers on Zoo Clues. See you then!